Okay, here we go. Module 49, part 2 of our video, page 2. So why do we care about the unemployment rate? You guys have heard me talk about this enough already. You should know what I'm about to say. Jobs, right? What we really care about are jobs. Okay, so if we have a high unemployment rate, that means that a lot of people are out of work, and that means that a lot of people are not okay. So people are not okay. Super sad, right? So we care about our unemployment rate because we care about people and we care about if those people are okay or not. So when an economy grows, the unemployment rate goes down, right? And an economy growing means that real GDP is increasing, which, real GDP and output are the same thing. So that means that when output increases, remember, big U is unemployment rate goes down. So output goes up, unemployment rate goes down. Remember, we can also call output real GDP. When output goes down, the unemployment rate goes up. Okay. There's also something called the labor force participation rate, which was about 62.9% in the United States last year in 2019. And that's the percentage of the population aged 16 or over who are in the labor force. So if we were to kind of go back to this, that says that 62% of this total population, age 16 and over, are in our labor force. And then, 100 minus 62%, so around 38% of our adult population is not in the labor force. So they figure in 2019, about 38% of people, kind of fell into this category. And so that's just that is not the unemployment rate. That is a different rate, the labor force participation rate. It can do a little bit to tell us about the economy in general. When the economy is doing really good, more people participate in the labor force. More people decide to get jobs because the jobs are so easy to get, and they can make a lot of money doing it. So people who, like, maybe there was like a mom who was staying home with her kids, but then this job opportunity came up. She was like, well, all right, kids, I'm going to put you in daycare, and mom's going to work because, like, she could make a lot of money doing it. All right. But your book just wanted you to be aware of this term and be aware of how it's different than the unemployment rate. But the majority of this module is about the unemployment rate. So that's sort of like an aside. All right. Here are our numbers for 2019. Our labor force had 160 million people in it. Our unemployment rate was 3.7%. Well, what does that mean? Like, to say that in 2019 the unemployment rate was 3.7%. Well, here is some reference for you. 4% unemployment rate is awesome. The unemployment rate is never going to be 0%, and we'll talk about that in the next module, why it's not 0%. So having a 4% unemployment rate means the economy is doing awesome. Output is way up. Most of the people who want a job have a job. And so the fact that last year 3.7%, even below that 4%, that is fantastic. The last bad recession that we had before this one now was in 2009. It was a terrible recession. Unemployment rate got up to 10%. So 10% is a terrible unemployment rate. And then the Great Depression was about 25%, which is like unimaginably bad. So the closer it gets to 4%, the better. And when it's getting up towards 10%, that's bad. But, who cares about these 2009 numbers? Let's take a look at some 2020 numbers, which I have here for you. You can write these down if you want to, but you don't have to. But it's just, well, at least to me, very, very interesting. So notice in February, before our pandemic hit, we were at 3.5%. Just amazing, a great economy. Most people who had jobs who wanted jobs had jobs. And then March, it went up a little bit because it was in March. Remember, March 13th. Well, for those of us SPPS people, right? March 9th was our last day of school. And then the 10th, 11th, and 12th, the teachers were on strike. The 13th, the strike was over, but the students didn't come back to school yet. And then when we showed up on, it was supposed to be Monday the 16th. We were supposed to come back to school after our strike. But then it was on Sunday, March 15th, that the governor called off schools in the whole state. So it was halfway through March that everything in the economy like kind of came to a screeching halt. And then boom, April hits, and look, we go from a 4.4% unemployment rate to a 14.7% unemployment rate. It was bananas, right? Like April was just insane. People were losing their jobs left and right. A lot of you and your families experienced that. And so, as you can see, if the really, really bad recession in 2009 was 10% unemployment rate, our April unemployment rate of 14%, 14.7% was just terrible, terrible, terrible. Okay, and then we see that since then it's steadily been going down, and right now we're sitting at about a 7.9% unemployment rate. So our last numbers were for September of 2020, and hopefully those numbers continue to go down as jobs continue to reopen. But yeah, this is so our economy right now is very, very unusual. It's not following the rules of the business cycle at all, because it's like being controlled right now by the pandemic, which is like, as you all know, a very unusual situation. Okay, let's move on to page 3 of our notes. And it's titled The Imperfections of the Unemployment Rate. So I just got done telling you guys that a 4% unemployment rate is awesome, right? And you now kind of understand that we're at a 7.9% unemployment rate currently, which is bad, but not as terrible as we've seen like in 2009, but not good. Well, that unemployment rate, it can give us that information about the economy, but it's not going to give us all of the information. There are things that the unemployment rate leaves out. There are people that the unemployment rate leaves out because it only considers the people who are in the labor force. And remember, to be in the labor force, you either have to have a job or be looking for a job. And a lot of us know people who they want a job, they say they want a job, but maybe they are what is called a discouraged worker, which means that maybe they looked for a job for a really long time and they really wanted one, but they could not get a job. There were no jobs for them to find, and they gave up. And they're figuring something else out. Maybe their parents are helping them out. Maybe they have a nice girlfriend or boyfriend or husband or wife or whatever who's helping them out. And they're just like, they just got discouraged. And they're like, I'm not going to look anymore. I just can't keep doing that. Do they want a job? Yes. Do they want to be in the labor force? Yes. But when the labor force is measured, when the unemployment rate is measured, because they haven't actively sought out a job in the previous 4 weeks, they are now considered to be not a part of the labor force. So those discouraged workers, it's like they're taken out of the labor force and put not in the labor force. So we could add discouraged workers to this list. And discouraged workers are definitely a sign that our unemployment rate is bad. But they don't get included, or no, excuse me, I said that wrong. They're definitely a sign that our economy is bad, but they don't get included in our unemployment rate. So that is why our unemployment rate is not perfect. So let's define discouraged workers. Those are people who looked for a job but gave up. And because they gave up and they're not currently putting in applications and resumes, therefore they are not in the labor force anymore. They're not in that labor force anymore. So we could have millions of people out there who want a job, whose families would be much better off if they had a job, but they're not going to show up in our unemployment rate, which means that our unemployment rate could look great. It could be that 4% unemployment rate. But if we have millions of discouraged workers, then that number looks really good. Yay, our economy's fantastic. But there's actually this group of people out there who are really suffering because maybe our economy isn't as good as it looks like it is. The other thing is what is called underemployed people. Now, underemployed people, they have jobs. They just don't have the types of jobs that they maybe quote should have. Like maybe they are part-time workers, but they really want a full-time job, but they can only find a part-time job. And maybe they are like, well, here, let's write that down before we move down. So they are part-time but want full-time. So those would be the people who really wanted a full-time job and they went out there and they looked for a full-time job, but they could only find a part-time job. So they took that because, something's better than nothing. But, if people want full-time jobs but can only find part-time jobs, that is a sign of a bad economy. But an underemployed worker is not included in that number for our unemployment rate. So again, we could have that awesome looking 4% unemployment rate, but we could have a lot of people who are out there working part-time jobs who want to work full-time, but they can't because they can't find those jobs. Maybe they don't exist where they live. And so that is a sign that the economy is bad, but our unemployment rate could still look really, really good. Okay, so also people who what we call overqualified. So when the economy is bad, maybe there's somebody who, has a college degree, they have work experience, they're a good worker, they show up on time, they do everything right, but they can only find a job like that. Maybe they're qualified to work a job where they're making $100 an hour, but they can only find a job where they're making like $30 an hour. So that would mean that they're overqualified. Like they have the education and the experience to get a better job, but they can't find one. All right, so here we see some weird terms, U3 and U6. Now, so the government, when they calculate the unemployment rate, they actually have like several different ones. So when we hear on the news that right now our unemployment rate is 7.9%, that's actually our U3. So we're going to call that the normal unemployment rate. But there is also something called the U6 or the unemployment rate 6, which it's the U3 plus discouraged workers and underemployed workers. And of course, our U3 or our U6 number is going to be bigger than our U3 number. So these are 2019 numbers right here. So the U3 was 3.7%. And so, everyone on the news can say 3.7%, that's great. And all the politicians can say, look at our great economy. But if you add in those people who are discouraged, who are underemployed, it was actually closer to 6.9%. So, a lot of people advocate or believe that we should use our U6 numbers because they more accurately reflect the economy. But for whatever reason, we don't. We use the U3. So when, the point of this is that our unemployment rate does leave out discouraged workers and underemployed workers. So our you know our economy might actually be worse than the unemployment rate leads us to believe it is. The other thing that the unemployment rate doesn't tell us about is it doesn't tell us about inequalities in our nation when it comes to finding jobs. So these are the 2018 numbers, the most recent ones I could find. And it says that for teenagers ages 16 through 19, the unemployment rate for 2018 was actually 12.8%. So not 4%, 12.8%. So for teenagers, that means it was really hard. And look here, for Black teenagers, it was 20.8%. So that really reflects inequalities in our country, in our economy, that, it clearly shows that different groups are doing better than other groups, right? So here's white adults, 3.1%, so low. Black adults, 5.9%. Big difference here. Now, these are just a little, they're like 2.5 percentage points away, but when we're talking about the unemployment rate, that's a big thing. And the inequalities between men and women, 4.1% and 3.6%. So, in conclusion, our unemployment rate does a lot to tell us about the economy. It does a lot to tell us who, or like how our economy is doing, how easy or hard it is to find a job at that time. But it can't tell us everything. It doesn't tell us how many people are discouraged workers who left the labor force because they couldn't find work, how many people are underemployed, and it doesn't tell us about our inequalities in our country. Another thing with the unemployment rate, you can find unemployment rates by like city and by county and by state. So sometimes like you might be looking around and you're like, man, they're saying that the economy is so bad, but I've got a job and everyone I know has a job. Well, like for example, in Minnesota, in during the 2009 recession, it didn't hit Minnesota as hard as it hit other places. So, like different states like Michigan and Ohio, it hit them a lot harder. So, if you are interested in this kind of information like me, you can find out more and get more details about where all that stuff, or like where different areas are and how different areas are doing. And like as up here, different groups and different demographics. All right, guys, that is it for Module 49. Don't forget to write your summary. Don't forget to do the practice problems. And don't forget to do Module 50. All right, take care.